Hello everyone, and welcome to Creating RESTful Web Services with Grails 3. I'm Jen Strater. I'm a consultant at Object Partners. Object Partners is a consulting firm out of Minneapolis, Minnesota in the United States. You may also know me as the co-founder of Great Ladies. Great Ladies is an organization that supports women, whether they're using Groovy, Grails, Griffin, any of the Groovy-related technologies, through networking and education. If you'd like to keep in contact, as well as see the slides from this presentation, follow me on Twitter. It's @JenStrater. So the agenda for this talk is to kind of go over a few things about creating RESTful APIs and RESTful web services that I think make it really easy and why you should really use Grails. Two of those include the resource annotation and RESTful controllers. I'm also going to go through a few helpful things like supporting multiple media types, custom response formats, and versioning. So if you aren't familiar with Grails 3, there have been some major changes. So now based on Spring Boot, which gives a lot of advantages that we can use those Spring Boot libraries as well. Switched to Gradle for the build system, which also adds in a lot of other features and Gradle plugins that we can use from there. As I'm going through the examples, if you're familiar with Grails 2, you may see some directory changes. Some structure has changed as well, some of it to match the Spring Boot, particularly as far as the configuration. Some tests have moved in a scripts directory. If you have questions, I've got the questions app on my phone. So when it comes to APIs, there's a great new feature that's been added since Grails 3.05, and that's the Web API profile. It's still kind of in progress, but there's a lot of things that are really neat that are making it even easier to create services. And so these profiles are kind of templates to get you started, and it removes a lot of the unnecessary features that I wasn't using to create APIs before. Things like it takes out the GSPs, it takes out some UI plugins, asset pipeline, things that you aren't going to use. There's also some new features with the Web API profile. You get two new things on the Grails, well, more, but two things I don't want to talk about on the Grails command line include a way to create domain resources or domain classes that automatically have that @resource annotation. And you can also create RESTful controllers via the command line as well. There's one thing that I want to touch on kind of briefly. So like I said, the Web API profile is still in progress. They announced at Spring 1 through a couple of the talks that there's this really exciting feature coming called JSON views, and so you can use a lot of the JSON type things. I'm going to talk about Grails 3.09, but that is coming in 3.1. So I wanted to kind of walk through how to create and how I created my test application. So I used GVM to specify that I want to use the version 3.09. And I created an app, and here's where that profile comes in. So we get -- profile equals web API to specify that I want this particular template and not the entire Grails web application framework that we normally would get. So if I create it, this is kind of what it looks like. Hopefully you can see that. We've got the typical things that we think of. We get config, resources.groovy for adding in your beans. The application.yaml is what may not be familiar if you're still using Grails 2. And we also get some default controllers. URL mappings is now in controllers. The application class is the Spring Boot main, and the tests have moved a little bit. Also notice in here that there is no views directory because we're not going to use that. So if I start up an app, right out of the box, if I curl 8080, I get this nice block of JSON. You probably can't read that, So I did print out the top portion of it. If you're familiar with getting started in Grails 2 in the development mode, you get this index file that you can click links for the existing controllers, kind of see things from there to get started. This is a very similar concept for APIs, but in your JSON. So you see what controllers are available, you get all the plugins that are there, what version of Grails, all the normal standard things that we would expect. So my real-world task was to create and it's an in-progress side project that I'm working on called Great Data. So as part of my outreach with Great Ladies, I often get asked how many women are actually using Groovy and kind of where do we want to get to. And I realized very quickly that I had no idea. I knew a couple women that I worked with, but I wanted to find a way to capture and display the gender ratios at different companies that are reported to me from all around the world. I do have it as a D3 project. If you download the slides, you should be able to click the link. It was kind of a weekend thing to get it going. The data was stored in a JSON file, and contributions you have to go through a GitHub pull request model. So what I've been working on is trying to convert that into an API. So I did get a sample repository up so that you can kind of look through the different demos for this talk. So my data model looks a little bit like this. So if each company has a name, there's an embedded country. The country has a name, abbreviation, and continent. And there are various statistics as well. For this, I'm just going to talk about the name and the country. The statistics are in the demo, though. So the first and easiest endpoint that I wanted to create was the country. Just had the three things. It wasn't, it's dependent on the company. So this is where the create domain resource comes in. So very similar if you're familiar with working with the Grails command line, Grails to create the domain classes. This is just a resource. You again get the country and the test. Out of the box, this is kind of what it looks like. Well, it is what it looks like. You get the default package is going to import all the REST stuff. And it annotates it with @resource. We get default formats of JSON and XML. And there's nothing in here. But what I wanted to do was then start configuring it. So I went through, I added a custom URI. So when I do, if I like to use plurals, so by default, we have the /country, but it would, I wanted to do /countries. I also added in the three properties here: string name, string abbreviation, and string consonant. So this is all a really simple way to get started, very little code here. So if I start out and try to do a get, it does establish that the URL mapping is on /countries, but I haven't created anything yet. So of course we'd expect it to return the empty list. So the next thing I went to try to do is post. So I wanted to create a new country. So we're in Belgium, so I'm going to use my Belgium as an example. I went through and created the scroll request, but it wasn't complete. And one of the things I wanted to show here is that the errors are really helpful. So rather, it adds in all of this stuff without me having to do much of it. It tells me what properties are missing, and it does return the proper 422 unprocessable entity. So of course, I then fixed my mistake and continued and had a post that was successful. It returns a 201 with the formatted there. It does add a class name, and we can go through and show how to remove that as well. The next thing I wanted to do was update. So I had a couple in there duplicates. So I wanted to update one of them. So by put, I've of course have the header in here. Still pretty simple. So I'm using the same version of Postman. So I've got the same URL /countries. right? Nope. Of course, I had forgotten to put the ID at the end. So it had this great support to tell me, oh, it's not supported. So I fixed that, and now I get it updated. Similarly, there's support for patch. So if I wanted to update the abbreviation, so I went from USA to US, from the 3-digit to the 2-digit abbreviation, or 2-character, I can do that, just update the one field and not update anything else. Again, 200 with the JSON returned. Now that I have a couple different countries in here, if I do a get again, I'll get that as a list, as we'd expect. But as you should hopefully recall, at this point, all I've done is create a domain class and run the app, add a couple fields. I haven't done too much. We get all of these automatic mappings. I haven't touched controllers, I haven't touched URL mappings, and I get a lot of the nice features, the static codes, the status codes, the methods, a lot to get started. So the other way that we could do this is through a RESTful controller. So through a RESTful controller, I would then start by creating a new domain class. And this is similar to the old way, but I'd have great data /company. And this is what's created by default. So there's nothing in here. Of course, I added 2 fields. So at this point, now that I have a domain class, I can generate a RESTful controller based on that. Generate it, remember to add it to the URL mappings. So in this particular case, I added custom rather than you can do resources and that would generate all of them. In this case, I wanted to do particular ones and not open everything up. So here's what the generated RESTful controller looks like. I get the company controller is going to extend the Grails RESTful controller. I get the standard formats, again, JSON and XML. It looks very similar to what the at-resource annotation was doing, but it gives us a lot more control. So when, in this constructor, it's going to call this super, but we can also override any of the other methods in here too. So there's a lot of customization that we can do from here. In the resource annotation, we can update the URI like I did. I also updated the read only to be true, because once I load that data initially, I don't want anyone else to update it. I also have a lot of flexibility in the URL mappings. So if you add a resources, Grails, of course, by convention, your controller, your domain class, all of those match by spelling, and it should see all of those. So resources would then pull in everything that should match. You can also specify it custom by your other URIs. You can restrict by method, and you can restrict those response formats as well. So one thing I wanted to also touch on was the default mapping. So if you've used Grails before, you're used to getting this controller /action. So if you have some kind of the country controller /action, then that's added by default. Especially in a RESTful API like this, if you're overwriting and you want to use all your plurals, remember to take this out so that you don't open up all of these endpoints. So the next useful thing that I did, I started as I added more to my URL mappings, I ran the URL mappings report. So this was really helpful to show what endpoints exist. In one case, I mapped something twice, so I knew to remove it. And it's another really helpful way when you're developing, make sure you run that and see what's going on, especially as your app gets more complicated. Another thing you may want to do is specify particular methods get restricted. So if we can access the controller, the action, and specify that only that method can be called. Everything else would get rejected. You can also specify on the controllers. So there, you can add a static allowed methods. In this case, it would take the save. The save method would only, or save would only take post. Update would only take a put. If you tried something else, it would reject it. So another thing you might want to do is look at media types. By default, if you don't specify anything, so we were looking at the different ones that had formats equals JSON and XML. But if you don't specify one, it uses XML by default. But you can add in what you want via mappings and controllers. So if you add JSON first, it's going to use JSON as your default, and then XML if you request it. You can add in lots of other types as well. One of the other things I found really cool about Grails, and it's not really 3 specific, was that you can request it by the URI extension. So if you go to like /countries.xml, and I have the format above where it's JSON and XML, even though JSON's the default, I can request XML just by the URI, and I thought that was pretty cool. And like it says in here, if you request something that's not allowed, it's a 406. So you can see from here where it would be really easy to add in any custom types. If you want to do that, it's in the application.yaml file, and you can see the list and add and remove and customize them from there. The next thing I wanted to do was customize the response format. So we talked about at the beginning how they had that class name, and maybe if you have dates, you may want to format your dates. There's, you can do this from marshalers or renderers. You register them. You can either register them very simply. I'm going to show a Bootstrap registration as well as a custom one in your beans. And then I will very briefly go over the new JSON views just as a comparison. So this was a very simple JSON marshaler that I added to the Bootstrap file. So Bootstrap was going to get run when it starts up, and it's going to say that every time I request a country and it's asking for JSON, that it's going to take only the ID name. In this case, I also changed the name, so it was from abbreviation to a shortened version of the abbrev instead. Then it's not going to show your class or any of the other things that were showing up before. So the next way to do this would be as a renderer. So I created a company JSON renderer and registered that. So this gets a little more complicated. So this is the example, and it's going to take the MIME type. So it's going to declare which, so it's only going to do JSON. So if it's XML, it's not going to try this. And you can overwrite how it's going to render. So I created through the JSON builder to do it this way. The one thing I changed was, so when I output the country, I want to do company.country.name instead of the entire object. This should look pretty similar to the way it works before. Let's see. The other way to do this, so that was for a single company, like when you're doing your show, your get on an ID. If on the root, when you have a container or a collection, you can customize that too. So you have to specify the target and what type of component it should look for, as well as the MIME types again. From there, you can render it however you want, remembering that that is a list instead of just a single. Okay. So the new thing that I was really excited to hear about is the JSON view. So as someone who's gone through from the full web framework, we're used to having these defaults where everything's convention-based. So you got You created a domain class, you did generate all, you got your controller, and you got a view that all lined up and matched up. So, but in APIs, you don't really use the GSPs. But we can instead use these new JSON views to replace GSPs to have a JSON format instead. That is coming in Grails 3.1. There are some links to talks at the end to talk about that. But I thought it was really cool and exciting that that's coming and should make that rendering process a lot easier. So here's one that I pulled from the second release candidate for the not found. Looks a lot simpler and more concise than having to create all of the other custom stuff we did before. So the other thing that you may want to do now that I've gone through a couple iterations is to version. And there are three main tactics that I use for trying to version. The easiest one is through having just a different URI, but then you're mixing part of your API in with the URI, which is supposed to be just about the resource itself. You can also do it as a custom header and through content negotiation. So of course, Grails supports all of these. If I wanted to do this through the URI, I did this through mappings. So I created two controllers, a hello version 1 and a hello version 2, if you go through the demo, and had those via namespace. You can also do similarly for an accept header, just specify the version there, and you would have the namespace as well. So here's what it looks like. I have two different side-by-side, really simple, just demo example. But the static namespace helps when configuring all the routing. Okay. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention security. I did go over, like all of this was open, and you may be able to post things you don't particularly want to. So there are some things that are hopefully coming. If you're using Grails 2, there is a Spring Security REST plugin, and there's a great video from Greach a year ago that goes through in depth how to do that. Hopefully that'll get ported to Grails 3 now that the Spring Security plugin has been updated. But of course, you could go through with the current Grails Spring Security and wire it yourself. Another example of that is to a screencast from Bobby Warner of Agile Orbit. There's a link in the slides that he goes through using the Spring Boot OAuth plugin, how to incorporate that into Grails. Okay. So in conclusion, I wanted to show that the Grails Web API profile streamlines the API creation, that the defaults support all kinds of things that we may want with an API. Your status codes, your methods, the custom media types, as well as response formats and versioning, and it wasn't that difficult to do. I also wanted to show that there are a lot of exciting things happening. This has been getting better and better with each release of Grails, and I'm excited to see where they go next. So this is a very brief overview, just the 30-minute talk, but I did give a more extended talk at GreatConf US, and I was able to look through recently the talks from Spring 1 GX, or Spring 1 2GX. Jeff did a really good talk that went into a lot of detail on how and why a lot of this works. And all of the new things that were coming are in Graham's talk on the 3x updates. It's also important to have, so I did put the documentation link in there as well. Okay. So I have a few minutes left. I can either, if anyone put questions in the app, I can do that, or I can go through the example code. Okay, I don't see any questions in the app, so I'll bring up the code. Okay, so let's do presenter mode. Nope. Okay, so here's kind of where I started. There's also some other fields in here as well, and I did link to these others. I can do, it's in mirrored mode. Okay. Okay, so do I drag? That's only showing my background. No. Okay. Okay, do we get full? Okay, hopefully that's better. So I did create the company and the country. So here's that at resource in use. Let's see. There is no controller for that one, but there is for company. And in this case, so I restricted it so it should only be JSON. If I requested XML, it wouldn't be allowed. Okay. The other interesting thing in here was the renderers. So the company renderer builds up JSON and customizes what you can have in here. The other was the collection. So that takes a limited subset of the fields that I had on the entire thing. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or want to see anything else? Okay, so that's all I wanted to show you. The link for the slides are on Twitter, as well as the app is on GitHub.